We tend to use the term loss and damage, and also we say losses and damages very much in everyday life. Perhaps after an extreme event such as a hurricane, you hear persons speaking about losses and damages and loss and damage. But at the level of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, loss and damage takes on a whole different meaning. And that is still a concept that people are trying to grapple with. To be able to explain it, perhaps the place I should start is with adaptation. And when we speak about adaptation, we speak about any action that you take to avoid, minimize, address the adverse impacts of climate change. So anything that you do rather, to help prepare for or respond to either actual or expected impacts of climate change. So for example, if I know that I'm expecting a drought or drought conditions as a result of climate change, I will conserve water, I will have rainwater harvesting systems, etc. That is an adaptation measure. Then you have the issue of mitigation, and persons often use mitigation to say, I mitigate against floods, I mitigate against landslides or something of that effect. But again, at the level of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, mitigation is referring to emission reductions. It's referring to those greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that are acting like a blanket, preventing the heat from the sun from escaping back to space. And as a result of that blanket and the trapped heat, we are getting warmer. And of course, it's impacting systems and processes and leading to the climate change that we see, like stronger hurricanes, etc. And then that brings in the picture of what do we do, which is trying to have cleaner forms of energy, such as geothermal, wind, solar, so that we are less dependent on the fossil fuels that are used to generate electricity, that in turn generate those greenhouse gases. Mitigation also refers to those being able to have your carbon sinks. So having trees, reforestation, that are able to trap those gases so they're not available, or they're available in a lower quantities, and therefore help with the situation of climate change, right? Because you are trapping those gases that would otherwise cause the damage, which takes us to loss and damage. Loss and damage looks at a situation where, despite islands, small island developing states like ours, putting our best foot forward in terms of adaptation, which we must do to survive, we contribute very little to those greenhouse gases, and yet we are among the most impacted. So despite the fact that we put our best foot forward in terms of adaptation, and let's assume that we are in a world where all the large emitters are also putting the best foot forward, which they aren't, in terms of reducing those greenhouse gases, the mitigation aspects of things, there is still a degree of loss and damage that will happen, that will occur. It's already locked into the system, and a lot of what would happen is largely unavoidable. Some of it is irreparable. Some of it is permanent as well. So we would speak to, for example, sea level rise. Sea level rise as a result of expanding oceans from the heat, but also as a result of melting ice caps. As a result of sea level rise, you have saltwater intrusion into freshwater supplies. You have loss of land, loss of territory, loss of beaches, and the impact that has on our tourism. So that is a case of permanence, sea level rise. Then you have the case of the increasing temperatures that can cause, for example, corals to bleach, to lose their beautiful, vibrant color, and they may die. And of course, that has an impact on tourism as well as fisheries. So you have that aspect of things as well. So that's a sea level rise and the increasing temperature. Then you have the issue of ocean acidification, for example. where, because of those greenhouse gases increasing, the ocean is getting more acidic. And the more acidic the ocean becomes, the more the creatures that live in there that have a calcium carbonate structure, the more the shells get damaged and eroded. It affects their ability to reproduce. So for example, for a conch fishery, you can understand how that can impact our tourism and our fisheries. There are cases of non-economic losses. You think about those extreme events that we've seen, unprecedented in our region, where we've had hurricanes forming very quickly over very wide areas, being very severe, getting very severe very, very, very quickly, but also impacting areas that we don't expect them to impact and remaining in those areas for a very long time. So you have those non-economic losses where you have loss of life, as we saw in some of our sister islands. Loss of territory, loss of life, loss of culture, loss of self, from having to start all over again in a whole new place. St. Lucia currently has many of our Dominican colleagues. Likewise, the Barbudans had to leave Barbuda to move on to Antigua and start all over again. So those losses are deep, and the process needs to be able to have something in place that deals with losses that are permanent, irreparable, in many cases unavoidable, and irreversible. The system needs to be able to have, the process needs to be able to have something that deals with those losses for those people, vulnerable countries, developing countries that need assistance with those types of losses to help with averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage.